Tonight, we are going to slow down together. We are going to wander quietly through 10 worlds that are long gone. You do not need to do anything but listen. There is nothing to prepare. There is nowhere to be, only here. A world without hurry is waiting for you tonight. A world that reminds you of something easy to forget in the daylight hours. That time is long, that the earth is patient, that the past has never once been in a hurry, not for anyone. Tonight does not need anything from you at all. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from tonight. Cities have always been full of people awake at this hour, quietly keeping their own small watch. It is comforting, somehow, to know who else is awake tonight. You are not alone in this. You do not need to know anything about history to be here. There will be no dates to remember, nothing to keep track of, nothing you are asked to learn tonight. You only need to be here, still, in the dark, letting your body grow heavy, letting your breathing slow down on its own. There is nothing to figure out tonight. There is nowhere else you need to go. This is not a lesson. This is only a long, slow walk through old, quiet places, 10 of them, one after another, until you drift off somewhere along the way. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Archive. Let us begin. Long before the first cities, on a hill above a wide, dry plain, someone was already building something enormous, and doing it slowly, by hand. Picture a man kneeling beside a great stone pillar as the light goes soft and gold at the end of the day. His name has faded now, the way so many names fade. But his hands are not lost. His hands remain there, in the shape of the work he left behind. He works with a stone tool, small and worn smooth by years of use. He draws it again and again across the same patch of limestone, back and forth, slowly, always slowly. The pillar rises taller than 3 men standing on each other's shoulders, a great gray shape against the darkening plain. It is not finished. It will not be finished tonight, or tomorrow night, or for many nights after that. He is not building alone. Further along the ring of pillars, other figures move slowly in the low light, some kneeling, some standing back to look, all of them silent with the particular quiet of people doing careful work at the end of a full day. There is a soft, steady sound of stone meeting stone, unhurried, almost gentle. It is the only sound on the hill tonight. The pillar in front of him carries the shape of an animal along one edge, a fox perhaps, or something like a fox. Its outline emerges slowly under his hands, day after day, season after season. He does not know how long the carving will take. He stopped asking that question long ago. The work simply continues. The way the wind continues, the way the light keeps changing above the plain, whether anyone is watching or not. Somewhere behind him, a small fire has been lit for the evening meal, and its smoke rises straight up into the still air, since there is no wind tonight to bend it. The smell of scorched grain drifts across the stones. No one hurries toward the house. There will be room for that. There is always room for that here. The evening meal, when it comes, is simple. Flat cakes of ground grain, cooked on hot stones. Roasted meat when the hunting has gone well, which it has this season. The builders eat, sitting on the ground among the pillars, in twos and threes, talking in low voices, or not talking at all. The younger man eats beside a carver from another valley, a man whose speech he only half follows. It does not matter much. They have worked within sight of each other for a whole season now, and there is an understanding between them that never needed words. One nods toward the other's pillar. The other nods back. That is the whole conversation, and it is enough. Afterward, some of the builders sleep here on the hill, rolled in skins near the warm stones. Others walk back down in the dark toward their camps on the plain, following paths their feet know, without light. The hill empties gradually, voice by voice, until only the fires remain, burning low among the standing stones. The old carver is one of those who stays. He has stopped making the walk down in the dark. His sleeping place is a hollow near the base of his pillar, lined with skins, sheltered from the wind by the stone itself. He says the stone holds the day's warmth into the night, and that an old man is entitled to borrow it. He lies there now, looking up at the carved edge above him, the animal shape he has spent so many seasons bringing out of the rock. From this angle, in this light, it seems almost finished. It is not finished, but it seems so, and he has learned to let an evening have its small illusions. The stars come out the way they always come out. He knows them the way he knows his tools. They were here before the pillars, and they will be here after. And there is a comfort in being the middle term of something that large. Sleep comes to him, the way it comes to people who have worked with their hands all day, without negotiation. One moment he is watching the carved edge above him, and the next the fires have burned down, and the hill has gone fully silent, holding its builders and its pillars and its unfinished animals all together in one great stillness, under the same slow stars. Somewhere on the plain below, a night bird calls twice and is answered. The grass moves. The world does what the world does when nobody is watching it, which is exactly what it does when everybody is. As the sun drops lower, the stone begins to hold its own warmth. The heat of the whole day gathered quietly in the surface beneath his palm. He rests his hand flat against it for a moment, just a moment, feeling that warmth pass slowly into his skin. It is a small thing. It is the kind of small thing a person remembers without meaning to, years later, for no reason at all. He wonders, some evenings, whether the pillar will still be standing long after he is gone, whether anyone will remember which hands shaped, which lines, which evenings were spent on which small curve of stone. It is a quiet worry, not a heavy one, more like a thought that visits and then moves on, the way clouds move on above the hill, never staying long, never truly leaving either. An older man works nearby, one who has shaped stone for more years than the younger man has been alive. His movements are slower now, but they are certain. The way movements become certain only after decades spent doing the same motion over and over without complaint. He does not look up often. When he does, it is only to check the light, the way a person checks the hour without needing a clock at all. His hands are broad, marked with pale white scars, old ones healed over so many seasons ago that he no longer notices them. Dust sits pale in the lines of his knuckles. He carries a second tool at his belt, smaller than the first. It is kept only for the finest lines near the animal's eye, where a heavy hand would ruin months of careful work in a single stroke. He works without looking at his hands. His fingers seem to know the stone, the way a person's feet know a familiar path home in the dark. No thought required, only years of quiet practice. Somewhere close by, a second fire has been lit. Someone begins grinding grain between two flat stones, the sound low and steady, almost like breathing. Above the pillars, the first stars are beginning to show themselves, faint and scattered, the way they always do at this hour. On this hill, in every season, the builders have known. The younger man watches him work for a while in silence. There is something steadying in it, something that asks nothing of him and gives him, in return, a kind of quiet company at the end of the day. The old man's chisel moves the way water moves over a stone in a slow river, patient, unbothered, certain of where it is going, even if it takes its time getting there. Near the end of the evening, the younger man finally asks the question he has been carrying all day. He asks whether the work matters when so few will ever stand here to see it finished. His voice is quiet. He does not expect an answer that will fully satisfy him. The old man runs his palm slowly along the stone, the way a person touches something they trust completely, something that has never once let them down. The stone remembers the warmth of the day, he says. It will remember this too. He does not explain further. He does not need to. The younger man goes back to his work, and for a good while, there is only the sound of tools moving slowly across stone, and the last light draining out of the sky above the wide, quiet plain. Nobody lives on this hill. That is the strange part, and it takes a while to notice. There are no houses here, no streets, no village grown up around the work. People come and they build, and they go back down to wherever they came from. They come from a good distance, some of them, days of walking. They arrive in groups when the season allows it, and they stay for a stretch, and while they are here, they are fed. Wild grain, ground and cooked in quantity. Game brought in from the plain. There is a great deal of eating that happens on this hill, and someone has to organize all of it. That is the thing. The pillars do not say directly, though it is written all over them. Before there were farms here, before there were cities anywhere, several hundred people were coordinating themselves well enough to quarry stone, move it uphill, carve it, raise it upright, and feed everyone for the length of the work. Nobody made them come. There is no sign of anyone being compelled. They came because the work was being done, and they wanted a hand in it, the way people have always turned up for a raising. The pillars go up in rings, each ring enclosing a space with 2 taller stones standing at the center. Some rings are older than others. When one is finished with, it gets filled in carefully with rubble and earth, and a new one is built nearby. The burying is not neglect. It is part of the practice, as deliberate as the carving, which means the hill has been swallowing these circles on purpose for generations, long before any wind or dust got involved. They do not know, of course, what will come after them. They cannot know it. But the hill has already begun the long, slow work of keeping what they are building. In the years after the builders finished, or simply stopped, the wind began carrying fine dust across the pillars, settling into every carved line, every worn edge, a little more with each passing season, so slowly no single day would ever have shown the difference. It did not happen quickly. Nothing about this hill ever happened quickly. The dust came slowly, the way sand fills an old footprint, patient and unhurried, until one day the tops of the tallest pillars stood only a little above the ground, and then, soon after that, not at all. The plain closed quietly over the hill, the way water closes quietly over a dropped stone. The hill grew still in a new way. Grass came. Small stones came. Rain came and went, season after season, year after year, and the plain above the buried pillars looked, for a very long time, like any other hill a person might walk across without a second thought, without ever knowing what it was holding underneath. For centuries, sheep grazed there. Shepherds followed their flocks up the slope in the low light of early evening, the way shepherds have always followed their flocks, thinking of little more than the animals ahead of them, and the coolness settling slowly into the ground beneath their sandals as the sun went down. One evening, so the story is told, one such shepherd noticed something pale catching the last of the light near the crest of the hill. A curved shape, half hidden in the grass, too straight along one edge to be simply a stone. He stopped walking. He looked again. He called his dog back with a low whistle. He left the flock to graze a while longer on its own. The grass was cool against his ankles as he crossed the last stretch of the slope. Above him, the sky was turning the same soft, fading color it must have turned on countless evenings before this one. Over countless flocks, over countless calm hills like this one. He knelt down the way the carver had once knelt in that very place ages before, and brushed the dust away slowly with the flat of his hand. The stone beneath his palm still held a little of the day's warmth, though the sun itself had already slipped behind the far ridge. Beneath the dust, the stone remained smooth, unbroken, carved, holding faintly the shape of an animal along one worn edge, exactly where a careful hand had left it, generations before the shepherd's grandfather's grandfather had ever walked this plain. He sat back on his heels for a quiet moment, saying nothing, the dog settling quietly beside him in the grass. Then he called softly for his flock and went on his way, the way a person does when they have seen something they do not yet have words for, and decide, for now, simply to carry it home in silence. The hill had not lost what it was given. It had only kept it, quietly, the way a pocket keeps a coin, the way a drawer keeps a letter no one has opened in years. Nothing had been destroyed. Nothing had needed to be. The dust had simply gathered, slowly, for more years than anyone could easily imagine. And then it had let go, just as slowly, when the time finally came. The carver could not have known his pillar would still be there, still whole, so many lifetimes after his own hands were gone and forgotten. He only knew on that last quiet evening that stone remembers warmth. He was right, though not quite in the way he meant it. The hill remembered everything he gave it. It simply took its time in showing anyone at all. The work was never lost. It only waited. It did not need to be seen to still be there, standing quietly beneath the dust for centuries beyond any single life. And it was, all that time, exactly where he had left it, facing the plain as before, patient, whole. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another hushed corner of the old world. Far to the north, on an island where the wind never fully stops, there was once a small village built low against the ground and against the weather. Picture a woman kneeling beside a stone hearth at the center of a small, round room. The fire has burned down to a slow, steady glow. It is late. Outside, the wind moves over the dunes the way it always moves here. Constant, low, familiar as breathing. She does not mind it anymore. She has lived beside that sound all her life. The house is built of thick stone, packed close against the earth on every side. It is warmed from within by the hearth and by the bodies that have filled it all day. Shelves of flat stone line one wall. They hold small bowls, a few tools, a comb carved from bone. She moves along them unhurried now, setting each thing back in its place before sleep. She does this every night. She does not need to think about which shelf holds what. There is a stone bed against the far wall, piled with dried heather and soft skins. It is still warm from where someone was sitting near it earlier in the evening. A second bed sits opposite, smaller, tucked into its own corner of stone. The room is small. It has always been small. It is not a large life, hers. It has also always been enough. She banks the fire down carefully. She turns the last embers under a thin layer of ash, so they will hold their heat quietly until morning. Smoke drifts up toward a narrow gap near the roof, unhurried, finding its own slow way out into the night. The smell of the sea comes in faintly beneath it. Salt, cold stone, something green. Her hands smell of wool. She has spent the evening working a length of it between her fingers, twisting it patiently into thread. Her mother taught her this. Her mother's mother taught her mother long before that. Each of them sat in this same low light, doing this same slow, patient work. A child sleeps already in the smaller bed across the room, curled small beneath a folded skin, one hand tucked under her own cheek. She had fought sleep for a while earlier, the way children do, sitting up to watch the fire until her eyes finally lost the argument on their own. Now her breathing is slow and even, matching almost exactly the rhythm of the wind outside. In and out, as though the whole house has learned to breathe together. The house is not freestanding. None of them are. The village is built as one connected thing, house joined to house, with low covered passages running between them, so that a person can go from one hearth to another without ever stepping outside. In weather like this, that matters more than anything else about the place. The passages are narrow and roofed with stone slabs, and a grown person has to stoop going through them. The woman knows every turn of them in the dark. She could walk the whole village blind and arrive exactly where she meant to. Everything here is made of the same stone. There are no trees on this island worth speaking of, and driftwood is too precious to waste on furniture. So the beds are stone, the shelves are stone, the tank beside the hearth, where they keep shellfish alive in seawater for bait, is stone, lined and sealed to hold the water in. What they do have, they keep. Bone for needles and pins and small tools. Whalebone when they are lucky. Antler traded from the mainland. Clay for pots fired low. Wool from their own small sheep. And hide and heather for bedding, cut fresh in season. It is not a poor life. That is the thing an outsider might get wrong. The house is warm and dry. The pantry has food in it, and there is a drain running under the floor, carrying waste away. Cut and covered by someone who thought carefully about where it should go. They know how to live here. It took generations to learn, and the knowing sits in every stone of the place. Winter is the season of indoor work. The wind decides that, and nobody argues with it. Through the darkest months, the village turns inward, passage to passage, hearth to hearth, and the work becomes the small kind. Carving, mending, making thread, telling the stories that get told every winter in the same words, because the words are part of the warmth. The child across the room knows most of them by heart already. She corrects her elders when they skip a part the way children always have, and her elders skip parts on purpose, sometimes, just to hear her do it. Outside, the sea does what the sea does in winter. Inside, the fire is banked, the shelves are ordered, and the same small rituals that have closed. Every day close, this one too. There is nothing in this room that has not been touched 1,000 evenings by hands that knew exactly where it belonged. Before she lies down, the woman does the last thing she always does. She checks the passage door, the stone slab that closes their house off from the walkway beyond. Not from fear, from habit, the way a person checks a thing that has never once failed. Precisely because it has never once failed. The slab sits true in its frame. It always sits true. She rests her hand against it a moment, feeling the cold of the outer air held off on the other side. And then she crosses back past the hearth, banks it one final notch lower, and lies down at last in the stone bed with its deep nest of heather. The wind goes on above the roof. The embers tick softly as they settle. Across the room, the child murmurs something in her sleep, resolves it, and goes quiet again. The woman glances at her now and again as she works the wool. Not from worry, only from habit, the quiet checking a person does without noticing they are doing it. Everything in the room is exactly where it should be. The fire, the shelves, the small sleeping shape across from her. It is a narrow world, this house, this village, this stretch of coastline. It is not a large world. It has never needed to be any bigger than it is. She thinks, some nights, about the wind outside, how it never seems to tire, how it has worn the dunes into new shapes over the years, without anyone deciding it should. She wonders whether the sand will keep doing that, slowly, for as many winters as the village stands. Whether one winter it might finally come too far and take something it should not. It is not a heavy thought. It passes the way most of her thoughts pass at this hour, quietly, without demanding much of her. Her grandmother sits on near the hearth, mending a small tear in a woven covering. Her stitches are slow and careful. Her eyes are half closed against the low light. She is old now. She has outlived 2 winters everyone said would be the hardest anyone had seen. She does not talk about the wind the way the younger woman sometimes does, with a small edge of worry beneath the words. The younger woman asks her, quietly, whether she ever fears the sand outside, whether she ever lies awake listening to it move against the walls. The grandmother does not look up from her mending, not at first. When she finally does, her face is calm. The same calm it has always been, for as far back as the younger woman can remember. The sand does not take things away, she says. It tucks them in. She goes back to her mending. She does not say more. The younger woman sits with that for a while, turning it over slowly, the way she turns the wool between her fingers. Something in her chest settles, just slightly. It always seems to, after her grandmother speaks. Outside, the wind goes on. It has always gone on. It will go on tonight, too, well after the hearth is banked and the whole village has gone quiet for the night. One low stone room after another, all of them holding their small store of warmth against the dark. The years that followed were slow ones. Most years are. One folded quietly into the next. The village stayed where it had always stood, close to the shore, low against the wind. And the wind, for its part, never stopped doing what it had always done. It carried sand, a little at a time, grain by grain, the way it always had. First along the low walls, then a little higher, then higher still, so slowly that no one inside the houses could ever have pointed to the day it began to matter. The dunes grew taller around the village without anyone deciding they should. They simply grew the way dunes grow following the wind's own patient schedule. In time, the sand covered the roofs, then the walls beneath them. The stone passageways that once connected house to house filled little by little, entrance by entrance, until there was nothing left above the ground but the shape of the dunes themselves, rounded, quiet, no different from any other stretch of coastline nearby. The village did not fall. It was not broken apart. This is not a story about ruin. It was simply covered. Slowly, the way a blanket is drawn up over someone already asleep, and beneath that covering, it waited. For a very long time, it only waited. Many centuries later, a great storm moved in, off the sea, stronger than most. The wind pushed hard against the old dunes for days on end. When it finally passed, a stretch of the coastline looked different than it had before. The storm had pulled sand away in wide, uneven sheets, the way storms sometimes do, revealing patches of ground that had not felt open air in longer than anyone could reckon. A man walked the shore afterward, checking on his sheep and his low stone walls. The wind was still strong that morning, though the worst of the storm had passed, and the air smelled of salt and torn seaweed and freshly turned sand. His sheep had scattered along the dunes overnight, the way sheep do in weather like that, and he moved slowly among the new hollows the storm had carved, calling them back one by one. Something in the newly bared ground caught his eye, straight lines where there should have been none. The corner of a stone shelf holding its shape yet, half buried in sand that had not settled again yet from the night before. He forgot the sheep for a moment. He knelt down slowly, the wind pulling at his coat, and brushed the loose sand away with his hand, working carefully the way a person works when they suspect they have found something they should not disturb too roughly. Beneath it, more stone, more shape. A room, small and round, exactly as it had been left, with a hearth at its center and stone shelves along one wall, standing in their old, familiar order. He sat back for a long moment, the wind still moving around him, the sheep still calling faintly somewhere along the shore. Nothing about the room looked broken. Nothing looked disturbed. It only looked as though whoever had last stood in it had simply stepped out, meaning to come back. The beds were there too, empty now of heather and skins, but unmistakably beds, exactly where a woman like the one from that old hearth might once have arranged them before sleep. Nothing had been taken, nothing had been broken. The sand had simply held the village close, the way it holds anything it is given, gently, for as long as it needs to. The passages came clear as the digging went on. House linked to house, exactly as they had been built, the low stone roofs, spanning the gaps as ever. A person could walk the village the way its people had walked it, stooping in the same places, turning the same corners. The dressers stood against the back wall of every house, facing the door, the first thing anyone entering would see. 2 shelves, sometimes 3, cut from flat stone and set on uprights. Whatever a household wanted seen went there. That much has not changed anywhere. The drains ran under the floors as before. The tanks sat beside the hearths, sealed at the joints. In one house, a small workshop had been set slightly apart from the rest, with the debris of tool-making scattered where it fell. And there were the small things, beads, pins carved from bone, a pot left in a corner. Dice-like objects nobody has satisfactorily explained, which is fine, because not everything needs explaining. Nothing about it looked like a disaster. That was the striking part. Houses do not usually survive with their furniture in place, unless people left in an orderly way and the sand came afterward, slowly, doing what sand does. The village had simply been closed up and covered over, and it had waited, warm and dark and intact, for a storm to come along and pull the blanket back. The village had not been lost at all. It had only been tucked in the way the old woman once said it would be, kept warm and whole and unhurried beneath the dunes for far longer than any single life could measure. And when the wind finally uncovered it again, it was still exactly where it had always stood. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. Long ago, beside a wide, slow river, there stood a city built on straight streets and clean water. Its walls were made of fired brick. The same brick, house after house, street after street, laid with a care that never seemed to waver. Picture a man walking one of those streets as the evening settles in. A coil of rope over one shoulder, a small clay lamp cupped in his other hand. He checks the wells along his route, the way he checks them every evening, one by one, moving without hurry from corner to corner. This is his work. It has been his work most of his life now. The city is settling at this hour. Doors are closing. Smoke rises thin and straight from cooking fires behind brick walls. Somewhere nearby, water moves softly through a channel beneath the street. It is constant, so constant that most people here have long since stopped hearing it at all. He stops at the first well. He lowers his lamp toward the opening, checking the brickwork by its small light. The bricks are fitted close, the way they are fitted everywhere in this city. Each one nearly the same size as the last. Laid by hands that valued sameness, valued order, valued things done properly and left that way. He touches the rim of the well with 2 fingers, an old habit. He is checking for any looseness in the stone. There is a steadiness to this well that he has come to trust completely. There is none. There has been none for a long time. The well has held steady through more seasons than he can count. It will likely hold through many more, long after he is gone. Further along the street, a bathhouse sits closed for the night. Its great sunken pool is empty and quiet, drained through channels built into the brick floor. During the day, it fills with people, with water, with voices echoing softly off close walls. At night, it only waits, clean, still, ready for the morning. Almost every house on this street has its own washing room. That is not something the keeper thinks about, because it has always been true here. But it is worth noticing. Small brick floors, slightly sloped, draining out through the wall into covered channels beneath the street. The channels carry everything away, out past the edge of the city. No one has to think about where it goes. The channels are covered with fitted brick, lifted out in sections when they need clearing. There are inspection points at intervals along each street, set where a person can reach in without tearing anything up. Someone planned that. Someone stood here before any of these houses existed and decided where each one would go. The whole city works this way. The streets run in a grid, wide ones crossing wide ones, narrow lanes filling in between. The wells sit where they are needed. The granaries sit where the carts can reach them. Nothing is where it is by accident. And the bricks. That is the part that catches the eye first. Every brick in this city, in every wall, in every well, in every drain, is cut to the same proportions. The keeper has never handled a brick here that surprised him. He could take one from a wall on the far side of the river and set it into a wall on this side, and it would fit. He does not know who decided that or when. It was decided generations before him. He only walks the streets it produced, checking the wells, one at a time, the way someone has done every evening for more years than anyone can say. He remembers, as a boy, watching his father do this same round, carrying the same kind of lamp, checking the same kind of brick. His father used to say, a city was not its walls, it was its water, moving quietly day after day, whether anyone noticed or not. He did not understand it then. He thinks he understands it a little better now. He passes a second well, then a third. The lamp throws a small, warm circle of light with each stop. The streets run straight here, crossing each other at clean angles, the way a person might draw them with all the time in the world and no reason to hurry. Near the edge of his route, he meets an older keeper, one who has tended these wells even longer than his father did. The old man rests on a low brick step, listening the way he often does to the sound of water moving somewhere beneath the street. The younger man sits beside him. He sets his lamp down carefully between them. He asks quietly whether the old man ever worries the water will one day stop, whether the wells will run dry, whether the whole patient system will finally fail after so many generations of careful use. The old man listens a while before answering. His eyes are half closed. His head is tilted slightly toward the sound beneath the stone. It is not the walls that make a city, he says finally. It is its water, moving quietly. It does not need to be seen to be doing its work. As long as the water moves, the city is still here. He says nothing more. The younger man sits with him a while longer in the cooling evening air, listening to the same soft sound the old man has listened to for years, after most people stopped noticing it at all. Before he turns for home, he passes the grain house at the edge of his route. a long brick building raised slightly off the ground to keep the damp away. A watchman sits near its door, half asleep already, a small lamp burning low beside him. The two men nod to each other. Neither speaks. There is nothing that needs to be said between two people doing the same kind of work at the same quiet hour in the same careful city. The grain inside will keep the whole street fed through the coming season, portioned out carefully, the way water is portioned through the channels, the way everything in this city seems to move, little by little, never rushed, never wasted. This city is not alone. That is worth knowing. There are others like it, up and down the river and out toward the coast, built to the same standard, using the same bricks in the same proportions, laid out on the same kind of grid. Goods move between them constantly. Beads, copper, timber from the hills, cotton spun and woven before most of the world had thought of it. Small square seals, carved with animals and with a neat row of marks, used to stamp bundles and jars so that everyone along the route knew whose was whose. The keeper has handled a few of those seals in his life, mostly by accident, picking one up from a street where it fell. The marks on them mean nothing to him. It is not his trade. He is no merchant. But he knows they mean something to somebody, and he leaves them where they can be found again. Whatever held all these cities to a common standard held for a great stretch, more than most arrangements manage. There is no great palace here that anyone has found, and no sign of one being needed. Perhaps it was only that a good way of building bricks, once discovered, is hard to argue with. The keeper does not think about any of this. He walks his route. He checks his wells. Above him the stars come out over a city laid in straight lines, and the water moves quietly beneath the street, and everything is where it belongs. On his way back, he passes the night market at the edge of his district, the last stalls closing up by lamplight. A seller of dried fish counts her remaining stock. A boy stacks empty baskets taller than himself, carefully, like a puzzle he has solved many times. The keeper buys nothing. He only walks through, nodding to the faces he knows, which is most of them. This is the hour he likes best, when the city is neither working nor sleeping, but somewhere in between, folding itself up for the night one small task at a time. The bakers will be up before anyone else, and the water will keep moving under the streets all night. And between the last stall closing and the first oven lighting, the city will belong to the well keepers and the watchmen and the cats. There is one more well on his route, though it is not really on his route. It sits in a small courtyard 2 lanes over, old, half-retired, used now by only a handful of houses. He could skip it. His father skipped it sometimes. He never has, and he could not fully say why. He checks it the way he checks the others. Rim, rope marks, the dark circle of water far below, catching his lamp for a moment like a small coin at the bottom of the night. All well. All as it was yesterday and the day before, back and back through years of yesterdays. Perhaps that is why he comes. Not because the well needs him, because there is a particular satisfaction at the end of a round in confirming one more thing that did not need confirming. He turns down his own street at last. His house is dark and warm, and his family is asleep in it. And tomorrow the round begins again, exactly as it should. The years moved on the way years do, one behind the next. The river beside the city moved with them, the way rivers always have. Rivers do not stay in one place forever. Slowly, over many slow seasons, this one began to shift its course. It pulled a little further from the city with each passing generation, the way a person drifts slowly from an old friend without ever quite meaning to. The wells grew harder to fill. The channels beneath the streets ran drier season after season, until there was not enough water left to keep the city as it had always been. People left, family by family, the way people leave a place that can no longer hold them. They carried what they could. They followed the river to wherever it had gone. The city did not fall in any sudden way. There was never a single night when everything changed. It simply grew quieter, house by house, street by street, until the wind moved through empty doorways instead of voices. The brick began, year by year, to hold the dust that drifted in on that same wind. Over the centuries, the dust became small hills, low, rounded, rising gently above the plain where the city had stood. Grass grew across them. Herders passed nearby without a second glance. The people always pass old, quiet hills that seemed to hold nothing more than the earth itself. It was only much later, when someone finally looked closely at those hills, that the city began to return. Diggers moved the soil patiently, one careful layer at a time, the way the old well-keeper might once have checked a single loose brick. And beneath the dust, exactly where it had always been, the city was still there. The bricklayers had worked in courses, so even that centuries in the ground had barely shifted them. Wall followed wall in the same steady lines, a careful hand had first set down. A woman on the dig knelt beside one wide stretch of wall. She brushed the dust away carefully, with even strokes. Beneath it, a well shaft dropped straight down into shadow. Its brick rim held round, whole, fitted close, the way a keeper once checked it by lamplight. The straight streets ran straight as ever. The wells sat round, their brickwork fitted close, holding the same careful order it held in its day. The bathhouse pool lay sunken into the earth at its center, empty now of water, but unmistakably a place built for water, for washing, for the quiet daily comfort of clean things kept clean. The drains came up intact. That surprised the people digging more than the walls did. Covered channels ran the length of every street, sloped correctly, fitted with their inspection points, able to carry water even now if water had been put into them. Houses came up with their washing floors in place, angled toward the outlet in the wall. Some had stairs going up to rooms that no longer existed. Some had courtyards where a family would have sat in the cool of the evening. The bricks measured the same everywhere. Street after street, house after house. The same proportions held across the whole city and across the other entities of that world besides. Whoever set that standard set it firmly, and it held for a very long time. What did not come up was any palace, no great tomb, nothing built to make one person look larger than everyone else. The grandest structure in the whole city turned out to be a bath, and the second grandest a granary, a place to get clean and a place to keep food. That says something, though it is hard to put a finger on exactly what. Perhaps only this, that a city can be remembered for its drains and its wells and its clean water, and that this is not a small way to be remembered at all. Nothing about the discovery was sudden. It happened slowly, the way most things in the city happened slowly. One brick, one street, one well at a time, until an entire quiet world stood revealed again beneath the plain, exactly where the water had left it so long before. It is not the walls that make a city, and it never was. It had always been its water moving quietly through the earth. You do not need to see water to know it is still moving somewhere beneath you. And even after the water was gone, something of that same quiet patience remained behind, held in the brick, waiting, age after age, to be found again. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. On an island ringed by a calm blue sea, there once stood a town of tall houses painted in soft colors. It is not a large town. Its streets are narrow, just enough to keep the sun's heat at bay through the long afternoons. Picture a potter in his workshop as the light turns golden outside his door. He is wrapping finished jars carefully in cloth, one after another, setting each into a low wooden crate lined with straw. His hands move slowly, without hurry. The way hands move when they have done a task 10,000 mornings before and trust themselves completely to do it right. The season is ending. Most of his jars have already been sold or traded. A few remain, and these he wraps with special care, since they were made for someone he will not see again until the following year. The straw crackles softly under his fingers. Dust drifts in the last low light through the open doorway. Outside, the town is settling into evening the way it always does at this hour. Someone sweeps a threshold nearby. A donkey shifts its weight in a shaded pen. Voices carry faintly from a rooftop, unhurried, the way voices carry when there is nowhere else anyone needs to be. The houses here stand 2 and 3 stories tall, built close along streets, narrow enough that a person can touch both walls with their arms out. It is not a cramped town for all its narrow streets. The upper floors have windows that catch the sea light in the afternoon. The lower floors stay cool all day, which is where the work gets done and where the jars are kept. The walls inside are painted, not everywhere, and not in every house, but often enough that the potter has stopped finding it remarkable. Blue monkeys climbing a rock face, swallows turning over lilies, young people carrying things in procession. Whoever painted them worked in a steady, confident hand, as though they had painted the same subjects many times before and expected to paint them many times again. There is running water in some of the houses, clay pipes set into the walls, carrying it in, carrying it out, joined so neatly that they rarely need attention. The potter does not think about them much. They were here before he was. His own workshop sits at street level, one room opening directly onto the paving stones. The wheel is set near the door for the light. His finished work goes on the shelves at the back, where the sun cannot reach it. Everything he owns of any value is in this room, and all of it fits comfortably. Down at the harbor, the boats have been busy for days, more than usual. He has heard them from here, the ordinary noise of loading, going on later into the evening than it normally would. The mountain beyond the town has been restless this season. It breathes out faint threads of smoke now and then, low against the horizon. It is not the first time. It did this in his father's time too, and in his grandfather's time before that. The town has always simply gone on living beside it. The way people live beside any old, familiar thing that occasionally clears its throat. Still, this season feels a little different. He could not easily say how. A little more restless, a little more present in the corner of his mind while he works. He glances toward it more often than usual, then returns each time to the hushed work in front of him. His hands settle again into the rhythm of wrapping, cloth around clay, straw around cloth, jar into crate, one after another, the shapes nesting close and careful, the way they always have. An old woman passes his open doorway, a neighbor. He has known her his whole life. She carries a folded cloth of her own toward the harbor path. She pauses when she sees him working. She asks whether he plans to leave with the others this week, the way many in the town already have, taking what they can carry down to the boats. He tells her he only wants to finish this last crate. The jars are for someone who is counting on them. He does not like to leave work undone. She nods slowly. It does not need explaining. It is the kind of nod a person gives when they understand something completely. Wrap them well, she says. Whoever comes back for them will want to find them just as you left them. She continues on toward the harbor. He watches her go for a moment. Then he turns back to his crate, wrapping the last jar with the same unhurried care he has given all the others. For whoever comes back, he says quietly to himself, more habit than anything else. It is what the potters here have always said at the end of every season, long before this one. He finishes as the light fades from gold to gray. He sets the crate against the wall beside two others already finished and looks around the small room one last time, checking that everything is in its place. The wheel, the tools, the shelf of drying clay, everything as it should be, ready for whenever he returns. He closes the door behind him gently, the way a person closes a door they expect to open again soon. He follows the old woman's path down toward the harbor, where boats are already gathering in the calm evening water. The walk down is one he has made most days of his life, past the potter's quarter, where 3 other workshops sit in a row and the smell of wet clay never fully leaves the street, past the presses where the oil is worked, down the stepped lane to where the ground finally levels and the sea opens up ahead. This town has always faced outward. That is the thing to understand about it. Ships come here from the mainland and from the larger island to the south, and they go on from here to places the potter has only heard named. Copper arrives, tin arrives, fine cloth arrives, and stone he has no word for, and small carved things that people buy because they are beautiful and for no other reason. His own jars have gone out on those ships. He does not know where they ended up. Somewhere across the water, in houses he will never see. People are storing oil in vessels he shaped with his own hands on an ordinary afternoon. That thought has always pleased him more than he would say aloud. It is not fame. Nothing about it carries his name, but the jars are out there, holding what they were made to hold, doing their work in rooms he cannot picture. At the harbor, the boats are loading in good order. There is no crush at the water's edge, no shouting. People have had days to prepare, and they have used them. Bundles go aboard. Children are handed down. Someone counts heads and counts them again. He finds a place and sits, his back against a coil of rope, and looks up at the town rising behind him in the last of the light, all those painted walls going gray as the sun leaves them. An old sailor settles onto the rope coil beside him. Someone he knows the way everyone in a town this size knows everyone. They sit without speaking for a while, watching the loading finish. The sailor has crossed to the mainland more crossings than he can count. He says the sea is easy this season. He says they will make the crossing by morning and be drinking someone else's wine by evening, and that the potter worries too much, which is what he has been saying for 30 years about everything. The potter does not argue. He watches the town instead, picking out the roofline of his own street, the gap where the lane turns down toward the presses. He knows every stone of the walk between his door and this harbor. He could make it blind. He has once or twice on moonless nights. The boats fill. The water goes from gray to black. Somebody laughs at the far end of the quay, and the sound carries the way. Sound carries over calm water, easy and clear. When his boat finally pushes off, the potter sits facing backward, watching the town instead of the sea. Most of the passengers do the same. Nobody remarks on it. The lamps of the harbor drop away first, then the pale shapes of the houses, then the town becomes a texture on the dark island, and then the island becomes a shape on the dark water, and the mountain above it breathes its thin smoke into the last of the light, patient, unhurried, keeping its own counsel. The potter thinks about his jars. wrapped in their straw, sitting in the dark of the workshop. He runs the inventory of the room in his head, shelf by shelf, tool by tool, the way a person counts what is theirs before sleeping in a strange place. Everything is where he left it. Everything will be where he left it. On that thought, at last he sleeps. In the days that followed, the mountain's breathing grew heavier. More of the town made its way down to the harbor, carrying what mattered most, leaving the rest exactly as it stood. There was no panic in it. It happened slowly enough, over days rather than hours, that people had time to close their doors properly, time to wrap their jars, time to leave their houses the way a person leaves a house they mean to come back to. And then, one quiet stretch of days, the mountain covered the town. Not all at once, not the way a wave might strike a shore. It came slowly, steadily. The way snow falls through a still evening. It settled first thin over the rooftops, then thicker. It filled the narrow streets bit by bit until the whole town lay soft and pale beneath it. Silent, holding its shape underneath the covering, the way a sleeping shape holds its shape beneath a blanket. The town did not vanish. It was not swept away or broken apart or lost in any violent way. It was simply held, gently, the way the potter's crate had been packed, layer upon careful layer, everything nestled close and undisturbed. Beneath that covering, the painted walls kept their colors. The wooden furniture kept its form, pressed into the shapes it left behind. The jars stayed wrapped in their crates, exactly where he had set them. Centuries passed above the covered town, one quiet layer of years settling over another, the way the ash itself had settled. Ages before, on the surface, nothing marked what lay beneath, only a gentle rise in the land, soft green now with grass and low shrubs, a hill like any other hill on the island. It was only much later that anyone began digging carefully into that gentle rise, moving the covering aside, not all at once, but gradually, a fine layer at a time. The way you might lift a blanket from someone sleeping so as not to wake them too suddenly. And beneath it, the town was still there. The narrow streets still ran their familiar course. The painted walls still held their soft, faded colors. They were protected all this time by the very covering that once seemed to take the town away. In one small workshop, wrapped jars still sat inside their wooden crate. The straw had gone to dust around them, but the jars themselves were whole, exactly as careful hands had left them, waiting for someone who never did come back. Not that year, not any year after. The ash had done something stranger still with the wooden things. The wood itself was gone entirely, dissolved away over the centuries. But the ash had packed so tightly around each piece that it kept the shape after the wood had left. A hollow in the shape of a table, a hollow in the shape of a bed. Fill those hollows carefully, and the furniture comes back, in outline, exactly the size and shape it was when someone last sat at it. So they filled them. It is not quick work, and it does not forgive a rushed hand. Slowly, with great care, one at a time, and beds came back. Tables came back. A small 3-legged stool came back, the kind a person pulls up to a workbench without thinking about it. The paintings came back too, once the ash was lifted away from the walls. Swallows still turning, monkeys still climbing. The colors had faded, but they had not gone. All those centuries underground, and the blue was still blue. There were staircases with the worn dip in the center that stairs get when enough feet use them. There were doorways with the frames still set. There were streets a person could walk down, turning corners the way the people who built them had turned those corners, arriving where they had arrived. And in room after room, on shelf after shelf, the ordinary things. Cups, lamps, tools set down at the end of a working day. All of it sitting where it had been left, as though the town had gone out for the evening and simply not come back. No one was found inside those quiet rooms. It is not a story about loss. The town had been given time, in the end, time enough to leave with what it needed. Time enough to close its doors gently, the way a person closes a door on an ordinary evening, expecting, without quite saying so, that someone will open it again someday. Someone finally did, and the town, held so carefully all that time beneath its soft gray covering, was simply, quietly, still there. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. Where a great river once met the sea, there was a harbor town, built on channels and islands. Its temples and warehouses were linked by water and by narrow wooden bridges. Picture a man walking along the harbor wall as dusk settles over the moored boats. He carries a long pole with a small clay lamp fixed at its end. He moves from post to post, lighting each one carefully. The flame catches slow and steady against the darkening water. This is his work. It has been his work for years. It is not a hard task, only a steady one. Light the harbor lamps, check the mooring ropes, watch the water. Anything out of place matters. Nothing more is asked of him, nothing less would do. The boats rock gently. Ropes creak softly, the sound blending into the low wash of water against stone. Further along the harbor, the great temple stands dark against the last color in the sky. Its columns catch the faint gleam of his lamps as he passes beneath them. He lights a third lamp, then a fourth, working his way slowly down the great stone wall. The air smells of salt. Faint smoke drifts from the boats, still tied up for the night. The harbor is built across a scatter of low islands, joined by bridges and by ferry, so that a person crossing from one side to the other must cross water at least twice. He has done it so often, he no longer notices the crossings. His feet find the bridge planks in the dark without asking him. Cargo sits stacked along the quay, under weighted cloth, waiting for morning, grain in sacks, jars of oil packed upright in wooden frames, bundles of something he does not recognize come in on a boat from further away than he has ever been. He checks the cloth is tied at the corners and moves on. The great temple stands at the harbor's center, its columns rising out of the water on their own island. Boats come in past it. Boats go out past it. Every sailor who has ever entered this harbor has seen it first, before the quays, before the warehouses, before anything else. He was born on one of these islands. His father worked the ropes on the quay, and his father before that. He has never lived more than a short walk from salt water, and it has never occurred to him to want to. The tide comes in a little further each year. He has noticed this. Everyone here has noticed it. The lowest step of the eastern quay is wet now at high water when it used to stay dry, and the old stone at the base of the wall has grown a green beard of weed it did not have when he was a boy. Nobody worries much about it. It is not a thing anyone can hurry or hold back. Water moves, ground settles. That is simply what water and ground have always done here, and the harbor has stood through a great deal already. He wonders, sometimes, whether the sailors far out on the water can see his small string of lights from where they are, whether it matters to them the way it matters to him. This quiet act of keeping the harbor lit through the dark hours. It is not a large thing what he does. It does not announce itself. It only continues. Night after night, the same slow walk down the same stone wall. An old harbor keeper sits near the end of the wall, mending a net by the light of his own small fire. His fingers move with old practice. The younger man stops beside him. He sets down his pole to rest his arm. He asks the old keeper whether the harbor lamps truly matter. Out here at the edge of the water, when the boats already know their own way home. The old keeper does not look up from his net right away. When he finally does, his face is calm in the firelight. The harbor does not need to be seen to be safe, he says. It only needs to be there, waiting, the same as always. The light is only a kindness, a small one, but kindness is rarely wasted. He returns to his mending. The younger man picks up his pole again. There is a small string of lamps behind him now, steady against the dark. He continues down the wall, lighting the last of them, the harbor slowly filling with small points of light against the growing dark. The years that followed brought slow changes to the land beneath the harbor. Slow changes come to any place built so close to water. The ground was always soft, layered with river-filled sand. Over many generations it began, quietly, to settle, a little lower each year, so little that no single season would ever have shown it. The sea, for its part, simply waited where it always waited. Patient, the way water is patient. It rose to meet whatever ground came down to greet it. The channels grew a little deeper. The lowest stones of the harbor wall grew more familiar with the tide. Nothing about it felt urgent. It only felt, slowly, like water finding its way towards something it had always been near. Everything that came into this country by sea came through here first. That is what the harbor was for. Ships arrived from across the water, and their cargo was checked and taxed and moved onto the smaller river boats that could make the trip upstream. Nothing skipped the step. The harbor was the door, and the door had a keeper. So the quays were busy in a particular way, not frantic, methodical. Scribes with lists, officials with seals, rope handlers who had tied the same knots so many times their hands did the work while they talked about something else entirely. The temple sat at the middle of all of it, and the two things were not separate. Ships made offerings on arrival. Sailors gave thanks for a crossing that went well. The priests kept records that overlapped with the harbor's own records. And between them, very little moved through this place without somebody writing it down. The lamplighter knows all this the way anyone knows the shape of the place they were raised in. He could not explain the tax arrangements. He does not need to. He knows which quay handles grain and which handles wine. And he knows that the light on the eastern wall matters more in autumn when the boats come in late. There are houses built out over the water on wooden piles and walkways between them, and small boats tied at the bottom of ladders. Children here learn to swim before they learn much else. It would be strange not to. In time, the harbor sank entirely, not in one dramatic moment, but across generations, so gradually that the town's own memory of exactly how it happened grew soft and uncertain, the way any memory grows soft when it stretches back further than living people can reach. It is not the kind of thing that happens all at once. It does not happen the same everywhere, either. Some parts of the harbor sat on firmer ground and held longer. Others, built out over softer silt, went first, tilting slightly as they settled. The way a heavy thing set down on soft earth will lean before it stops. People adjusted, the way people do. A quay that flooded at high water was raised or abandoned for another one. A house that took water in the lower room became a house where nobody used the lower room. There was always somewhere else to move to, until eventually there was not. Whole generations lived through this without ever calling it a disaster. To them, it was simply the way things were going. The water was a little higher than in their father's day, and their father had said the same about his. You do not see the whole shape of a thing like that from inside it. Nobody ever does. By the end, the town had thinned out rather than emptied. People had drifted off toward the cities upriver in ones and twos across many decades, following work and family the way people always have. The harbor did not close on any particular day. It just handled less each year until it was handling nothing. The temple columns went under first, then the warehouses, then the harbor wall where lamps had once been lit each evening. The water closed over the harbor the way water closes over anything given enough years and enough patience. Fish moved where boats once moored. Silt drifted down softly, settling over stone the way dust settles over stone on dry land, softening every edge, blurring every hard line, keeping everything it touched. For a very long stretch of years, the harbor rested there beneath the sea, entirely unseen. The town above it slipped slowly out of memory, the way so many old places do. It was divers, much later, who found it again. They moved through the dark water with lamps of their own, small, steady lights pushing back the deep blue-green dark. The way the harbor keeper's lamps once pushed back the ordinary dark of evening. They swam unhurried along what had once been the harbor wall. Their lights caught the shapes of fallen columns, still holding their carved lines after everything the water had carried over them. They found the temple stones resting where they had settled centuries before, still arranged in patterns a careful eye could trace, back to walls, to doorways, to rooms where people had once stood and spoken and prayed. Coins lay scattered in the silt nearby, small and dulled, but whole. Statues stood half buried, their faces softened but not erased, turned the same direction they had always faced. The silt had done the keeping. That was the thing they understood only gradually. What would have crumbled in open air had been sealed instead. Under fine river mud, packed close and airless, and mud like that preserves in a way almost nothing else does. Wood survived. Rope survived. In places. Things that should have been gone entirely were simply there, softened, but there. They found boats, not fragments of boats. Boats, whole, resting on the old harbor floor where they had settled when the water took them. Their timbers held the way a shipwright had set them. They found the mooring stones, worn smooth in grooves where ropes had pulled against them for years. They found weights and hooks and small ordinary things dropped over the side of a quay by someone who never thought about them again. The divers worked in slow shifts, the way the water required. It does not go faster for wanting it to. Visibility came and went. A day's progress might be one square of harbor floor, brushed clear by hand, photographed, and left exactly as it lay. One of them, resting at the surface between dives, said afterward that the strangest part was how ordinary it all felt down there. Not like a ruin, like a harbor on a quiet night with everyone gone home. The statues took years to raise. Some were too large for any single lift and came up in pieces, cradled in slings, breaking the surface for the first occasion in more than 1,000 years to the sound of winches and gulls. One was a figure taller than 3 people, carved from a single block that had stood at the temple entrance, greeting every ship that came in. It lay on the harbor floor for all those centuries, face up, looking at the underside of the water. When it finally rose, streaming into the air, the people on the recovery boat went silent for a moment, all of them without anyone suggesting it. Then the work went on, because the work always goes on, but everyone aboard remembered that silence afterward and mentioned it. When they told the story of the day the harbor began coming home. The recovered pieces are displayed near the water now in a museum built where people can see the sea from the windows. That was deliberate. The harbor and the sea were never really separable, and it seemed wrong to divide them. at this late stage. Visitors move among the statues and the anchors and the small dulled coins, and every so often one of them looks up, out the window, at the flat blue horizon under which the rest of it lies, because most of it lies there yet. What was raised is a fraction. The harbor keeps the remainder, and the divers return season after season, and the sea gives back a little more each year at its own pace, in its own order. Nobody is in a hurry about it anymore. The urgency of discovery has settled into the steadier rhythm of tending. Divers who worked the first seasons have grown older on this water, and younger ones have taken their places. Learning the site the way apprentices have always learned things, by going down with someone who knows it and watching what their hands do. The maps grow a little more complete each year. The story grows a little fuller. And under it all, under the boats and the maps and the careful patient work, the old harbor lies where it has always lain unbothered, keeping the rest of itself for later. The harbor waited a very great while. It can be brought home at whatever pace it asks. One diver drifted gently above a fallen column. Her lamp traced its length from base to broken edge. She paused there a good while, watching small fish move in and out of a gap that had once been a doorway. The stone did not need her to notice it. It had been waiting all the same. The lamps were long gone. The mooring posts had rotted away, but the harbor itself, in its shape and in its bones, was still there, still holding the same quiet order it had always held, only now lit by a different kind of light, carried by different hands, moving slowly through the same patient water. The old keeper had been right all those years before. The harbor did not need to be seen to be safe. It waited beneath the waves the way it had once waited beneath the stars. Patient, unhurried, and in the end it was found again, exactly where the sea had kept it. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. Beneath the soft volcanic hills of an old highland, there was once a city that did not rise into the sky. It sank quietly into the earth instead, room below room, floor below floor. Picture a weaver sitting cross-legged in a small stone chamber, deep beneath the surface. A single clay lamp stands steady beside her. It is not warm here, but it is not cold either. It is always this way, this far down, unmoved by whatever weather is happening in the world above. Her loom is simple, propped against the smooth-cut wall. Her hands move slowly across it, thread by thread. The same patient rhythm she has kept for years. The stone around her holds a faint warmth, gathered from lamps and bodies and old habit, just enough to keep the deep chill of the rock at bay. Somewhere nearby, water trickles softly through a channel cut into the floor. It carries its slow way down toward a cistern further below. The sound is constant, familiar, almost like breathing. She works without needing much light. Her fingers know the pattern by feel now, the way a person's feet know a staircase they have climbed 1,000 times before, in the dark, without stumbling once. The chamber she sits in is one of many on this level, and this level is one of many below the surface. The city goes down further than most who live in it have ever walked. Stairways connect one floor to the next, cut, narrow, and turning, so that a person descending must slow down whether they mean to or not. Air moves through all of it. That was the first thing the builders solved before anything else. Shafts run from the deepest floors all the way up to the open sky, drawing fresh air down and stale air out so quietly that most people forget the shafts are there at all. On the lowest levels, where the stone is coolest, a person can feel the faintest movement against their skin. The stone here cuts easily. That is why the city exists. It is soft enough to shape with simple tools, and it hardens once it meets the air. So, a room carved carefully in one generation is still standing, unchanged. 4 or 5 generations later, the builders knew this. They built accordingly, and slowly and well. There are storerooms on the levels above her, cool and dry, holding grain and oil and root vegetables through the whole of winter. There are stables further up still, and rooms for pressing, and a chapel cut from the same rock as everything else. Water comes from wells sunk deeper than the lowest floor, so that no one above ground could ever spoil it. None of it was built quickly. None of it was meant to be. A room here, a passage there, added by whoever needed it, in whatever season allowed for the work. The city grew the way a tree's roots grow, which is to say without any plan anyone wrote down, and yet somehow exactly as it needed to. Above her, up through many levels of carved stone, the ordinary world goes on. Wind, weather, whatever else moves across the surface. Down here, none of it reaches her directly, only a kind of hush, thick, complete, the particular quiet of stone that has never once let in the sky. A young apprentice sits nearby, sorting wool into baskets, restless the way apprentices often are. He glances toward the narrow stone stairway that leads up, level by level, toward the world above. He asks her whether she ever misses the open air, whether the mountain above them ever feels heavy, pressing down on all this quiet stone. She does not stop her weaving as she answers. Her hands keep their steady rhythm. Over and under, over and under. The mountain holds us the way a pocket holds a coin, she says. It is not weight, it is only a kind of keeping. He sits with that for a while, turning it over slowly. The way she turns the thread between her fingers. The lamp burns on, steady, unbothered by the many tons of stone, resting quietly above it, exactly where it has always rested. Life down here follows the lamps. It does not follow the sun. There is no other way to mark the hours. People sleep when they are tired and wake when they are rested. And the day arranges itself around the work rather than around the light. Cooking happens on the upper levels, near the shafts, where the smoke has somewhere to go. The smell travels, though. It always travels. A person on the 4th floor down can generally tell what is being made 2 floors above them, and There is something companionable in that. Animals are kept in the levels nearest the surface. Their warmth rises, which helps. Their noise carries down the stairways. It is not bothersome. It is simply part of the evening. A goat complains 3 floors up. Nobody minds. The stone stays the same temperature all year. That is the great gift of the place and the reason it exists. Outside, this highland swings hard between blistering summers and hard winters. Down here it is cool in the heat and mild in the cold every month without anyone doing anything about it. Children learn the stairs early. They learn which passages connect and which dead end, and they run them in the near dark years before they are trusted with a lamp of their own. To a child raised here, the city is not confusing at all. It is simply the shape of home. The years that followed pass the way years pass in a place built to endure them, slowly, without much fuss. The city below continued its quiet rhythm well after the weaver herself was gone. One generation settled into the rooms the last generation had shaped. The stone itself stayed unchanged through all of it. In time, for reasons no one now remembers clearly, the deep rooms were left empty. The stairways grew dark. The channels ran dry, or nearly so. The world above simply went on with its ordinary business, forgetting, slowly, what lay just beneath its floors. Houses were built above the old city in later centuries, ordinary houses. 4 ordinary families. Their foundations were set into the same soft volcanic stone without anyone below quite knowing what those foundations rested upon. Life continued up there in the usual way. Meals, seasons, small daily errands. It was one such ordinary day, in one such ordinary house, that a man decided to knock through a wall in his cellar. He was hoping to make more room for storage. The wall gave way more easily than he expected. It opened not into more stone, but into empty space, dark and cool, air drifting out that smelled faintly of old dust and older stillness. He held his lamp toward the opening. He found a passage. The passage led to a room. The room led to another passage, and that one to more rooms still chamber after chamber, level after level, descending quietly into the hillside, exactly as it had been left, undisturbed for longer than he could easily imagine. He moved with care through the first few rooms. His lamp caught the smooth-cut walls, the small alcoves, the channels once used for water, now dry and silent. Nothing had collapsed. Nothing had been destroyed. It does not need repair, only recognition. The city had simply waited there in the dark, holding its shape the way stone holds its shape, patient beyond any single lifetime. The air surprised him most. He had expected it to be close and dead, the way air goes in a sealed place. It was not. It moved. Faintly, but it moved, drawn along the passages by shafts he could not see, doing the work they were cut to do, after all this while with no one left to need them. He found the tool marks next. Small, regular, running along the walls in overlapping arcs where someone had swung a pick in the same steady rhythm. hour after hour. He held his lamp close to them. They were as clear as if the work had stopped the week before. Further in, the passages narrowed. He had to turn sideways in places and duck in others, and he understood after a while that this was deliberate. The city had been shaped so that no one could move through it quickly. Even now, even alone, he found himself slowing to the pace the stone asked of him. He counted floors as he went, though he lost the count somewhere below the third. Rooms opened off rooms. Stairways dropped away into dark he had no lamp enough for. He stopped, eventually, not because he had reached the bottom, but because he understood he was nowhere near it. He climbed back up through his own cellar and sat down on the floor of his house, dusty, holding a lamp that had burned most of its oil, trying to work out how to explain what was underneath. It took years to map what he had found, level after level, going down further than anyone had guessed, room opening into room. There were stables, storerooms, wine presses, a chapel with a barrel-vaulted ceiling cut from solid rock, wells sunk from the lowest floors, deeper still, so that water could be drawn without ever going up. There were the great round doors, cut from single discs of stone, set into channels beside certain passages so they could be rolled across from the inside. Each one weighed more than several people together. Each one had a hole through the center. They had been placed with enormous effort by people who wanted the option of closing a passage and having it stay closed. And there were the shafts, dozens of them, running the full height of the city, keeping air moving through every level. Some doubled as wells. All of them were cut straight and true, from the bottom up or the top down, by people working with hand tools in the dark. Nothing about the place had been improvised. It is not the work of people making it up as they went. It only looked that way at first. Given time, the logic of it came clear. The way the logic of a well-built house comes clear once a person has lived in it a while. Other cities turned up nearby after that. Then more. It became evident that this one was not unusual at all, only larger and better preserved than most, and that the whole region was quietly honeycombed underfoot, had been for generation after generation, with people living directly above it and thinking nothing of it whatsoever. Visitors walk the upper levels now, in small groups, ducking where the passages duck. Their lamps are electric, but the effect is much the same as it always was. A warm pool of light moving through the dark, showing one room at a time, never the whole. Most of them fall quiet somewhere around the third level down. It is not fear, it is the hush the place itself imposes, the same hush it imposed on everyone who ever descended these stairs, the sense of being held inside something patient and enormous and entirely calm. Guides point out the kitchens, the presses, the chapel. They roll the great stone doors a hand's width to show that the doors still roll. And visitors touch the walls, almost all of them, somewhere along the way. a flat palm against the cool stone. The same gesture the weaver made without thinking. The same gesture people have always made against stone that has kept them safe. Down in the lowest opened level, where visitors are not taken, the air moves the way it has always moved, along passages that have not held a lamp in years. The wells hold their dark water. The stairways wait. None of it needs anyone. That is the strange dignity of the place. It was built to shelter, and it stands ready to shelter, and whether anyone ever again requires, it is a matter on which the stone offers no opinion. It simply continues, room below room, floor below floor, doing what cut stone does, which is nothing, magnificently, for as many centuries as it takes. Somewhere in the town above, a family is eating dinner directly over the 7th level down. They know it now, of course. Everyone here knows it now. The children of that house have been down on the tours like everyone else, and have touched the walls like everyone else, and have come back up blinking into the daylight of their own street. It changes very little, knowing the bread still needs buying, the evening still needs getting through. But once in a while, on some ordinary night, one of them will pause with a cup halfway to the table and think about the rooms below. The rooms below the floor, all that patient hollowed stone holding up their chairs, and feel the small, pleasant vertigo of living on top, of so much kept and sleeping history. Then dinner goes on. It always does. That may be the most honest tribute a buried city ever gets, and there are worse ones. The lamp on their table burns the way lamps have always burned in this town, above the ground, and below it, one small warm light doing its ordinary work at the end of an ordinary day. Deeper rooms revealed storage chambers, still faintly marked by generations of use. One small chamber might once have held a loom, much like the weaver's. Only the smooth wear of an old stone floor remained to suggest it, worn slightly thinner in one place than anywhere around it. Exactly where patient feet must once have sat for years. Word spread slowly through the town, above, the way word does in small places. More of the hidden rooms were opened, one careful passage at a time. The city did not need to be rebuilt. You do not rebuild something that never fell. It only needed to be uncovered gently, the way a person uncovers something they suspect is still whole beneath the dust. The weaver was right all those years before, though she could not have known how right. The mountain had held the city the way a pocket holds a coin. Close, quiet, unbothered by the passing of so many seasons above. Nothing had been lost down there in all that time. It had simply been kept, resting exactly where it had always rested, waiting for someone to knock gently on the right wall. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. Beside a wide river in an old valley, there was once a workshop where bronze was cast through the long hours of the night. The fires never fully went out. They only ever settled, low and orange, waiting for morning. Picture a caster crouched beside a clay mold, checking it by firelight. The mold is not cool yet. It is still warm. It does not cool on anyone's schedule but its own. Not hot anymore, but warm, the way a stone stays warm well after the sun that heated it has gone down. He will not touch it again until it cools fully. That is the rule of his craft, and he has never once broken it. It is not a fast craft, bronze casting. Bronze cannot be hurried. He learned this before he learned anything else about the work. It sets on its own schedule, not his, not anyone's, only its own. Nearby, an apprentice waits, young and restless. The way apprentices always are. He keeps glancing toward the mold, as though watching it hard enough might speed the cooling along. The caster does not scold him for it. There is no use scolding a young man for wanting to see. He only shakes his head slowly and goes back to banking the coals, spreading them evenly, keeping the fire low and steady through the stretch of night still ahead of them. The mold in front of them took most of a season to prepare. That is the part people forget about bronze. It is not the pouring that takes the time. That part is short. Everything before it takes months. First, there was the model, shaped in wax over a clay core, worked and reworked until the face was right. That alone took most of a season. The caster remembers finishing the mouth 3 separate times before he was willing to leave it. Then the wax was covered, layer over layer, with the finest clay slip, each coat left to dry before the next went on. Too thick and it cracks. Too thin and it fails when the metal comes in. The caster has learned the thickness by feel. The way a person learns the weight of a full water jar without measuring it. Then the whole thing went into the fire, and the wax ran out through channels left for that purpose, leaving a hollow shaped exactly like the face that had been there. The clay hardened. The hollow waited. And then the pour, molten bronze, tipped in one steady motion, filling every space the wax had occupied. That part takes the length of a few breaths. Everything else, the months of wax, the weeks of clay, the whole slow, patient business of it, exists only to make those few breaths come out right. Now, the mold sits cooling, and there is nothing left to do but wait. The apprentice has not yet learned that the waiting is also the work. Around the workshop, other molds rest, each in its own stage of slow cooling. Some hold the shapes of faces, broad and calm, waiting to be freed from their clay shells. Others hold smaller things, a bird's wing, a curved horn, a tree, still only half formed, its branches not yet cast. The workshop itself is a low building of packed earth and timber, open along one side to let the heat escape. Clay dust covers everything. It lies pale on the tool handles, in the seams of the workbench, in the creases of every hand that works here. No one bothers to brush it away anymore. It settles again within the hour. Along the back wall, the clay for the molds is stacked in careful mounds, sorted by fineness. The finest is kept nearest the workbench, wrapped in damp cloth, so it does not dry out overnight. It takes days to prepare properly, washing, settling, straining, then settling again. The caster learned that work before he was ever allowed near the fire. An older woman sits at the far end of the bench, grinding charcoal in a shallow stone bowl. She has worked in this shop since before the caster arrived. Her hands are steadier than his. Even now, she does not speak much. She has never needed to. She glances at the apprentice once, catching him watching the mold again, and something like a smile crosses her face. She remembers being that young. Everyone in this shop remembers being that young. The night stretches on around them, quiet and warm, the fire holding its low orange glow. Somewhere outside, the river moves past in the dark, going wherever rivers go, in no particular hurry to arrive. The apprentice finally asks the question he has clearly been holding all evening. He asks why they cannot simply open the mold now, carefully, just to see how the face is coming along underneath. The caster sits back on his heels for a moment before answering. Bronze cannot be hurried, he says again, more gently this time. It sets at its own pace, like most things worth keeping. Open it too soon, and you ruin the face before it ever has the chance to become one. The apprentice does not argue. He only nods and settles back beside the fire, watching the coals glow steady in the dark. Somewhere above them, smoke drifts up through a gap in the roof, unhurried, finding its own slow way into the night sky. They wait together, saying little, the fire keeping its low and even heat, the mold keeping its own patient silence. It is, in its way, a kind of prayer, this simple act of waiting for something to become what it is meant to become. The apprentice eventually stops watching the mold. He lies back on a folded mat near the wall, hands behind his head, looking up at the smoke as it finds its way out through the gap in the roof. The caster lets him rest. There is nothing more to do until morning, and a young man who has learned to wait has learned most of the craft already. The fire settles further. The coals shift once, then go calm again. The caster adds nothing. He only watches the way he has watched 1,000 fires on 1,000 nights, knowing exactly how much heat is left in them without needing to test it. Outside, the valley is dark and warm. Frogs sound from somewhere near the water. A dog barks once, far off, and then thinks better of it. By the time the sky begins to gray at its lowest edge, the mold has cooled fully. The caster checks it with the back of his hand, the way he always does, and finds it ready. He wakes the apprentice with a touch on the shoulder. Together they break the clay away carefully, piece by piece, and beneath it, exactly as it was meant to be, a face, broad, calm, whole, cast perfectly because no one rushed it. Centuries later, it was farmers digging an irrigation ditch who first struck something hard and strange beneath the soil. Not stone, not root, something smoother, something shaped with clear intention. The city around the workshop is walled in earth, rammed and packed by hand, and it takes in a good stretch of the plain. Inside it, there are houses and markets and other workshops doing other things. Jade cutting, pottery, weaving. The bronze shop is only one trade among many, though it is the one that eats the most fuel. Charcoal comes in by cart from the hills. Copper and tin come from further off, traded down through hands the caster has never met, arriving as ingots that he weighs carefully and stores under lock. It is not cheap the way clay is cheap. Bronze costs, and everyone in the shop knows it. Nothing here gets wasted, and offcuts go straight back into the crucible. Everyone in the shop knows the recipe by feel rather than by measure. So much copper, so much tin, a little more tin if the piece needs to hold a fine edge, a little less if it needs to take a heavy blow without cracking. The caster learned the proportions from the man who trained him, who learned them from someone before that. None of it is written down anywhere. It is not carelessness. It is simply how this knowledge travels here, mouth to hand to mouth, one apprentice at a time, and it has traveled that way for generations, enough to be trusted. Outside the wall, the fields run down to the river, and beyond the fields the hills go blue in the distance. Rice grows well in this valley. That is finally why any of this exists. Good land, good water, enough surplus that some people can spend their days making things rather than growing them. The years that followed brought slow changes to the valley, the way slow changes come to any place shaped mostly by rivers and seasons. The workshop's fires, one by one, over many generations, finally went cold for good. No one now remembers exactly why. Only that the work, at some point, simply stopped, and the valley grew quiet in a new way. The finished bronze faces, the ones once freed so carefully from their clay shells, were laid to rest in the earth nearby, arranged with evident care, the way a person arranges something they intend to keep safe rather than something they mean to lose. Soil gathered slowly over them, season after season, the way soil gathers over anything left undisturbed for enough years. Grass came, then trees. The valley went on with its ordinary business above. Farmers working fields that had no way of knowing what rested quietly beneath their furrows. Centuries later, it was farmers digging an irrigation ditch who first struck something hard and strange beneath the soil. Not stone, not root, something smoother, something shaped with clear intention. They dug carefully after that, the way people dig once they sense they have found something that deserves care rather than haste. And slowly, the earth gave back what it had been holding. Bronze faces, broad and calm, their expressions unchanged by all the centuries spent in the dark. A tree, its branches finally whole, cast complete after all, risen again the way it once stood beside the workshop fire. The faces were larger than anyone expected. It is not a scale anyone had predicted. Some were larger than a person. Broad cheeks, straight noses, eyes set in shapes no one had seen anywhere else. Whoever cast them had a way of working that belonged only to this valley and to no other place anyone had found. There were masks with ears spread wide. There were figures standing straight-backed with their hands held out and empty, as though they had once been holding something that has not survived. There was gold, hammered thin as cloth. There was jade, worked so smooth it catches the light even now. And the tree, tall as two people, branched and hung with small bronze birds, cast in sections and fitted together by hands that had solved a problem no one had shown them how to solve. The earth did not give back any writing along with the bronze. There is no record here of what these people themselves. That is simply how it is with some places, and it asks nothing of anyone. The work came through, and the words did not, and the work has turned out to be enough. But the work itself came through. Every mark of every tool, the seam lines where the sections joined, the small corrections where a caster went back over something that had not come out right the first time. All of it present, legible, in the only language bronze keeps. The faces stand in a museum now, lit softly, arranged so that visitors come upon them the way the farmers did. Suddenly, and all at once, people stop in front of them. It is difficult not to. The faces look back with the same calm they have always had, the calm the caster worked into the wax on ordinary afternoons before anything at all had happened to the world. Children press close to the glass. Artists sit on the benches and draw. And every day, someone stands in front of the great masks a little longer than they meant to, caught by something they would have trouble naming. It is not mystery, whatever the signs say. It is recognition. The faces were made by hands for reasons that mattered to the people who made them, and the hands and the reasons are gone. But the mattering is somehow still in the metal. That is what people stand there feeling. That is what patient work leaves behind. The valley the faces came from is quieter these days, given over to fields again. The old city wall, a low green ridge that farmers plow beside. Digging continues there, in seasons, at the careful pace such work demands. Most years bring up something, a fragment, a bead. Occasionally, something that rearranges what everyone thought they knew. The people who do this work speak of the site the way sailors speak of the sea, with a respect that has stopped needing to explain itself. There is more down there. Everyone agrees on that. How much more and what? The ground will decide in its own season, the way it has decided everything else about this story. Patiently, one careful layer at a stretch. Nothing had been crushed. Nothing had been melted down. It is not a fate bronze always escapes, but this bronze had. The earth had simply held it. The way the caster once held his molds, patient and unhurried, waiting for the right moment to let it see the light again. The old caster had been right about more than he knew. Bronze does not hurry, and neither, it turns out, does the ground that keeps it. Both set in their own time. Both, in the end, become exactly what they were always meant to become. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. In a dry valley, far from any sea, there once stood a city that never raised a defensive wall. It is not a city built from fear, only cotton and stone, and the soft sound of music drifting between its plazas at dusk. Picture a woman sitting outside her home as the heat of the day finally breaks. She works a length of cotton between her fingers, twisting it slowly into thread. The same motion women in this valley have made for as long as anyone remembers. The desert stretches wide and pale beyond the city's edge. It holds the last warmth of the sun well after the sky has begun to cool. It is not an unkind desert. It is only quiet, the way this whole valley is quiet. Dry air carries sound further than a person expects. From somewhere near the central plaza, faint music drifts across the rooftops. Flutes, carved from the bones of birds, played by musicians who have practiced since childhood. The notes are simple, unhurried. They rise and fall, the way breath rises and falls. She listens without stopping her work. Her hands move on their own now, old in the craft. The thread grows steadily between her fingers, thin and even, ready for the loom, waiting inside her home. Her daughter sits nearby, still learning the motion. Her thread comes out uneven in places, thick, then thin, then thick again. She frowns at it sometimes, frustrated in the small, patient way. Children are frustrated by things that simply take as long as they take. The mother does not correct her too often. She only shows her again, patiently. It is not scolding that teaches this kind of work. The same motion, repeated without complaint, the way it was shown to her once. The music continues from the plaza. It weaves itself into the evening, the way cotton weaves itself into thread. One small motion joining the next, until something whole takes shape. The flutes are played by a man the whole valley knows, though few could say much about him beyond that. He plays most evenings. He has played most evenings for as far back as the mother can remember, since she was smaller than her daughter is now. He sits at the edge of the sunken plaza, where the stone holds the day's heat longest. His flutes rest beside him, in a row, each one cut from a different bone, each one carrying a different voice. He chooses among them without much thought. He simply picks up whichever sunsuits the evening. Nobody pays him for this. Nobody asks him to do it. He plays because the plaza is there, and the evening is there, and the sound carries well in dry air. It is not a performance. It is closer to the way a person hums while working, except that the whole valley can hear it. The mother has never spoken to him. She would not know what to say. But she has measured out a great many evenings by his playing, and she suspects she is not the only one. Below the plaza, the fields run in long green rows toward the river. Cotton, mostly, some squash. The plants stand quiet in the last of the light, their leaves gone soft and dark. Somewhere among them, someone is walking home, unhurried, the way everyone walks here at this hour. The cotton is what the valley lives on, though not in the way a stranger might guess. Very little of it becomes cloth here. Most of it becomes nets. The nets go down to the coast, where the fishing villages take them, and the fishing villages send back what they pull from the sea. Dried fish, shellfish, things the valley has no other way of getting. It is an old arrangement, older than living memory, and it has held steady across generations because both sides need it. So the mother's thread is not only thread, it is fish eventually. It is dinner in a month's time. She has never thought about it in those terms, but she understands it the way everyone here understands it, which is to say without needing to say it. The river runs low this time of year. It comes down from the mountains and gives out into the valley in channels the farmers cut and recut every season, spreading it across the fields a little at a time. Nothing here grows without that work. The valley is dry. It has always been dry. Everything green in it is green because someone carried water to it. Beyond the fields, the desert starts and does not stop. Pale hills, pale sky at the horizon. It is not hostile, exactly. It is simply large and old and entirely uninterested in anything happening down here among the cotton rows. The city is not large. It has never needed to be. A few thousand people, perhaps, living close together in a valley that gives them what they need and asks little in return. There is no wall around it. There has never been any reason to build one. The daughter asks, at last, why the desert never seems to change, why it always looks the same, day after day, season after season. The mother considers this for a moment before answering. The desert does not erase, she says. It dries things gently and keeps them. It is patient that way, more patient than we are most days. The daughter thinks about this. She goes back to her thread. Her hands slow into something closer to her mother's steady rhythm. The flutes play on in the distance. The desert holds its warmth a little longer against the coming dark. The years passed the way years pass in a valley with no urgency in it. Slowly, without much fuss. The city's plazas, its low mounds, its quiet rhythm of cotton and music continued largely undisturbed by anything the wider world was doing. The plazas are the heart of the place. There are several, sunken and round, cut down into the ground with steps running around the inside so that people can sit facing each other. Sound behaves oddly in them. A voice from the center carries clearly to the top row without being raised. Around the plazas stand the mounds, built up in stages across generations. Each one began smaller and was enlarged, layer over layer, by people filling woven bags with stone and stacking them into the structure. The bags stayed inside. They are still in there now, holding their loads exactly where they were set down. It is not the work of people driven to it, as far as anyone can tell. It looks more like the way a village raises a barn. Everyone comes. It gets done. It takes what it takes. The mother has helped once or twice in her younger years, carrying bags up the ramp with everyone else and coming home too tired to spin. She remembers it as a good few days. There was food and talking, and the particular ease that comes from doing something large with a great many other people. Her daughter will probably do the same when she is older. The mounds are never really finished. There is a rhythm to it that nobody wrote down. There is always another layer eventually, another season when the valley decides it is ready. That is how a place like this endures. Not through any single decision, through the slow accumulation of many small ones made by people who mostly wanted to get through the day and be warm that evening. In time, for reasons the record does not make clear, the city grew quieter still, then quieter again, until at last it stood empty, its mounds settling gently under the desert's dry, patient weather. Sand gathered against the low walls. The way sand gathers against anything left standing enough seasons in a place like this. It did not bury the city violently or all at once. It simply drifted, grain by grain, season after season, softening every edge until the mounds looked, to anyone passing, like nothing more than gentle hills rising from the valley floor. For a very long stretch of years, people walked past those hills without a second thought, the way people walk past any old rise in familiar ground. Herders grazed their animals across them. Travelers rested in their shade. No one thought to look closer. Even when people did look, they did not always see it. Some walked the mounds and took them for natural. Others suspected something was under there, but had no particular reason to find out. The valley had other things to attend to. The mounds were not going anywhere. There is something almost restful in that. A city sat under those hills for age upon age, and ordinary life carried on directly above it, and nobody was troubled by not knowing. The not knowing cost them nothing. The city waited, and the herders herded, and both arrangements worked perfectly well. Seasons turned over the mounds. The dry wind came and went. Cotton kept being grown in that valley by people who had no idea their great-grandparents' great-grandparents had grown it in the same fields, using the same river, spread through channels, cut along the same lines. Some things continued without anyone deciding they should. That is the soft thread running under all of this. Not preservation as anyone planned it, just continuity, carrying on underfoot the way it usually does. It was only much later that someone finally looked closer, noticing how regular the mounds were, how deliberately spaced, how unlike the ordinary shape of desert hills. They began to dig carefully, the way people dig when they suspect the ground is holding more than it appears to. And the desert, true to its own quiet nature, gave back everything it had kept. Slowly, nicely, the way it had always done things. Plazas emerged beneath the sand, their stone arranged in careful order as ever. A small flute of bone was found, resting where it had been left, its surface worn smooth by hands that had played it long before anyone now living was born. More came up as the digging went on, bundles of cotton thread still wound, the fibers gone brittle but holding their twist, woven nets knotted by fingers that knew the pattern by feel, small carved beads, fragments of matting from a floor someone once swept. There were storerooms too, sunk into the mounds, their walls still true, and running through everything, in every layer, cotton seeds, cotton fiber, cotton thread, in every stage between raw and finished, as though the whole valley had been built around the patient turning of it. What the diggers did not find was as telling as what they did. No fortifications, no weapon caches, nothing that spoke of a city bracing itself against anything. Only the ordinary things: food, cloth, music, the quiet daily business of people who had somewhere warm to sleep and enough to eat and a plaza to sit in when the heat broke. One of the diggers, a woman working a trench near the largest mound, uncovered a section of floor worn thinner in one spot than anywhere around it. Smooth, slightly hollowed, the kind of wear that only comes from someone sitting in the same place, doing the same work across a great many evenings. She did not know who had sat there. No one ever would. But the floor remembered them anyway, in the only way a floor can. The valley is being worked again now, in its own way. Not rebuilt, kept. The mounds are cleaned and shored, the plazas cleared of drifted sand, season after season, by people whose whole occupation is making sure the place goes on standing. Some of them grew up in villages nearby. They walk to work past fields where cotton is growing, because cotton never stopped growing here, and they spend their days tending a city their many times great-grandparents may well have helped raise, bag of stone by bag of stone. In the evenings, the site empties, and the desert light does what it has always done, turning the mounds gold, then rose, then gray. The wind moves across the plazas. Somewhere down the valley a radio plays, faint and tinny, the modern echo of flutes. And the city sits in the middle of it all, older than almost everything, patient as ever, letting itself be kept. School children visit in the cooler months, walking the plazas in loose lines, sitting on the sunken steps where the sound gathers. Their teachers stand at the center and speak without raising their voices, and the children in the top rows hear every word and are amazed and make their teachers do it again. It is a small demonstration. It lands every year. Somewhere in every group, a child looks around at the pale patient mounds and understands, in the sudden way children understand things, that people stood exactly here and were spoken to and listened, that the steps were shaped for sitting, and here everyone sits. The lesson could not be simpler, and there are people in that valley who trace their whole working lives back to the day it landed on them. Nothing had been ruined. It is not a story of ruin. Nothing had been lost that way, only to the years. And the years in this valley had always moved gently. The desert had dried things carefully, the way the mother once said it would. It kept them whole, waiting beneath the sand for as long as it took. The music, of course, could not be found again, in quite the same way. But the flute remained. In its silence, there was still something of the old rhythm. Patient, unhurried, exactly the way the desert had always kept it. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. Beside a great river, within palace walls of fired brick, there was once a room lined floor to ceiling with tablets of clay. Thousands of them. Letters, stories, simple household lists, all pressed carefully into soft earth and left to harden into something that could last. Picture a scribe seated at a low table as the palace settles into evening around him. A single lamp burns beside his work. In his hand, a small reed stylus, its tip worn smooth by years of use. Before him, a fresh tablet of damp clay waiting for the last words of the day. He presses the stylus into the surface with care, one small wedge-shaped mark at a time, the way he has done every evening for longer than he can count. It is not fast work. It was never meant to be fast. Each mark must be pressed with care, or the words will not hold their shape once the clay dries. Around him, shelves rise into the shadows, row after row of tablets already finished, some new, some old, all of them waiting quietly in their places. Letters between distant cities, records of grain and cloth and oil. A few songs copied down so they might be sung again, years after the voice that first sang them has gone quiet. He finishes the tablet in front of him. A short letter, meant for a scribe in another city. He sets it carefully aside to dry. The clay is soft now, fragile, easily smudged by a careless hand. It will need hours to dry. It will need patience. Both this room has always had in abundance. He reaches for another blank. They are kept in a covered basin at his elbow, wrapped in damp cloth, so the clay stays workable through the evening. He takes one out and works it briefly between his palms, warming it, feeling for grit or air. If either is there, he sets the tablet aside and takes another. A single trapped bubble can split a tablet as it dries, and split clay keeps nothing. The stylus he uses was cut for him years ago from a reed gathered along the river. It has outlasted 3 others. The tip has worn to exactly the angle his hand prefers, which is to say it has worn to match him over a great many evenings, the way tools do when one person keeps them long enough. He was a boy when he first learned these marks. He remembers pressing them badly, over and over, on the same practice tablet, smoothing the clay flat with his thumb and beginning again. His teacher never hurried him. It is not a craft that rewards hurry. There was no reason to rush. The marks would come or they would not, and rushing had never yet made them come faster for anyone. They came eventually. Now his hand makes them without asking him. He can hold a conversation and press a clean line at once. Though he rarely does, he prefers the quiet. There is another scribe at the far end of the room, younger, working through his own practice tablets by a second lamp. Every so often, the sound of clay being smoothed flat carries across the shelves, beginning again and again. The older scribe does not look up. He knows that sound well enough. The room is ordered, though it takes a while to see how. Tablets of the same kind are shelved together. Letters with letters, records with records. The longer works are split across several tablets, and each one carries a line at the bottom, repeating the first line of the tablet that comes next, so that anyone shelving them can put them back in sequence without having to read the whole thing. Some tablets carry a marks showing which collection they belong to. Others carry the name of the scribe who copied them. A person who knew the system could walk in here and find what they wanted before the lamp burned down. The archivist knows the system the way the scribe knows his stylus. He has never written it down anywhere. It lives in his hands and in his memory and in the small habits he has taught to everyone who works here. Copies matter more than anyone outside this room understands. A tablet can crack, a shelf can be disturbed. So, the important works exist in more than one copy, kept in more than one place, because the archivist learned early that a single copy of anything is a copy waiting to be lost. That is really what this room is. Not a collection of clay, a very slow, very patient argument that things should be kept. He wonders sometimes whether anyone will still read these words, ages after he is gone. The clay feels so ordinary in his hands. Just earth, shaped and pressed and left to dry. It does not seem like the kind of thing that could hold a voice for very long. An old archivist moves unhurried between the shelves nearby. He checks each row the way he checks it every evening, making certain nothing has cracked, nothing has been misplaced, nothing has been left exposed to damage it could easily avoid. The young scribe asks him, quietly, whether he ever worries the tablets are too fragile for the work they are asked to do, whether clay, of all things, can truly be trusted to keep a voice for long. The old man runs one hand slowly along a shelf of tablets. It is not a careless touch. It is the way a person touches something they trust completely. Clay is patient, he says. Fire only makes it harder. Words pressed into earth return to earth and wait. He says nothing more. The young scribe sits with that a while, turning it over slowly. The way he turns his stylus between his fingers before beginning each new line. The lamp burns low and steady beside him. The shelves hold their long, quiet rows of words, waiting, patient as the clay itself. What is in this room would surprise anyone who assumed a palace collection would be all decrees and inventories. Some of it is, most of it is not. There are medical texts listing symptoms and what to do about them, written by people who had watched carefully and wanted the watching to be useful to somebody else. There are lists of plants, lists of stones, lists of stars, and where they sit through the year, kept by people who went outside night after night and wrote down what they saw. There are dictionaries, which is stranger than it sounds. Word lists in one language set beside the same words in another, so that a scribe generations later could read something written in a tongue nobody spoke anymore. Someone thought about that. Someone sat in a room like this one and worried about being understood by people not yet born. There are stories, too, long ones running across many tablets about a king who went looking for a way to live forever and came home without one, about a great flood and a man told to build a boat, about friendship and losing a friend and what a person does afterward. The young scribe has copied parts of those. Everyone here has, at some point. It is how the copying is taught, and it means the stories go on, being written out, hand after hand, generation to generation, each copy made because the last one might not last. That is the thing about clay. A single tablet is fragile. A room full of copies is not. The years that followed brought change to the city. Some of it slow, some of it sudden. Little of it ever reached this settled room directly. The tablets stayed where they had been placed, shelf after shelf, row after row, undisturbed by whatever else was happening beyond these walls. In time, the room itself was lost to the world above. Its roof gave way. Its walls settled bit by bit under the weight of dust and fallen brick, until the whole space lay buried beneath a low, unremarkable mound, indistinguishable from the ground around it. Centuries passed above that mound, one quiet layer settling over the next. The way dust always settles when given enough years and no reason to hurry. Grass grew. The river shifted its course, inch by inch, the way rivers do. The city above simply went on with its life, unaware of what still waited beneath it. It was diggers, much later, who first found the room again, moving carefully through the loose earth, uncovering tablet after tablet, still resting in careful rows, exactly as the old archivist had once arranged them. Some were cracked but whole. Others were as clean and legible as the day they were pressed. The work went slowly. It does not go any other way. Clay that has spent centuries underground does not always come up willingly, and a tablet lifted too fast can break along a seam no one can see. So they worked the way the scribes had worked, one small motion at a time, brushing rather than pulling, waiting rather than forcing. The tablets came up by the hundreds, then by the thousands. They filled crate after crate, and still the shelves gave more. Whoever had gathered this room had gathered it with real intention over years, perhaps over generations, the way a person builds something they expect to outlast them. They were packed and shipped eventually to a museum a long way from the river they came from, crated, carried, unloaded, and set out on new shelves in a colder country. And there they sat for a good while longer, because finding them had turned out to be the easy part. Many arrived broken. It is not destruction, exactly. They came in pieces, and the pieces of one tablet mixed among the pieces of 100 others. So the work became a matter of matching, edge to edge, curved to curve, hand to hand, since every scribe's pressing was slightly his own, and a practiced eye can learn to tell them apart. People spent whole careers on it, fitting fragments together, one join at a time, year upon year, in rooms that must have been quiet in much the same way the original room was quiet. There is a symmetry in that which nobody planned. The tablets were made slowly by patient people, and they were put back together slowly by patient people, with a great gap of centuries in between that changed nothing about the pace of the work. Joins are being made even now. Pieces held apart for generations turn out to belong together, and a line that broke off in the middle finds its ending, and a sentence nobody could complete becomes a sentence again. That is the quiet miracle of the thing, not that the room survived. That people cared enough, on both ends of all those centuries, to do the slow work twice. The song fragment found among the shelves turned out, when it was finally read, to be a lullaby, or something very near one. Lines about rest, and about a small one being watched over, pressed into clay by a scribe who perhaps had children of his own, or perhaps only remembered being one. It is a strange and gentle thing to think about. Of everything a great library held, the letters of kings, the records of grain, the maps of stars, one of the pieces that crossed all those centuries intact was a song for helping someone fall asleep. Somebody sang it once. Somebody wrote it down so it would not be lost. And the clay did what clay does, and the mound did what mounds do, and the song waited under the ground through everything, patient as the tablets around it, until hands came and lifted it back into the light, still able, after all that silence, to say, rest now, you are watched over." Scholars read the tablets aloud sometimes in the old language, reconstructed syllable by patient syllable. Recordings of it exist. The sounds are strange and formal and slow, and nobody alive can say precisely how close they come to the real thing. But something crosses over anyway. The rhythm of it, the shape of speech built for rooms with lamps in them, for evenings, for one voice going on quietly while others listen or drift. You can hear, under the reconstructed sounds, the ordinary human act underneath. Someone saying words in the dark to someone else, in the oldest arrangement there is. Reading them took longer than finding them. The marks had to be learned again from the beginning. Slowly, the way the young scribe once learned them by lamplight. It took many people, working many years, before the room began to speak. And when it did, what it said was mostly ordinary. That was the surprise of it. Not grand pronouncements, not the business of kings. Letters between people who knew each other. Notes about grain and cloth and oil. A complaint about a shipment that arrived short. Instructions for preparing a remedy. Lists, endlessly, of the small things a household needs to keep itself running. Among them were letters, ordinary and unremarkable, meant for scribes in other cities, never delivered, waiting instead in this quiet room for longer than anyone could have imagined. There were household lists, simple records of grain and oil, and somewhere among the shelves, a fragment of a song, its words readable even now, waiting to be spoken again after so long a silence. The old archivist had been right after all. Clay is patient. Fire had only made it harder, and the earth had simply kept what it was given, the way earth keeps most things gently, without complaint, for as long as it takes for someone to come looking. The words had not been lost. They had only been waiting, pressed into soft clay, grown hard with the years, resting quietly beneath the ground until careful hands returned them, at last, to the light. Let us wander somewhere else now, to another quiet corner of the old world. Deep within a warm, green land, there once rose a city of temples. Their towers were carved with such patience that entire lifetimes passed between the laying of one stone and the next. Picture a temple at the end of a long day, moving slowly across a wide stone courtyard. His broom is made of gathered branches, bound simply, worn soft at the ends. He works without hurry, clearing fallen leaves from around the base of a great carved doorway. The heat of the day is finally breaking. Somewhere above him, monkeys move through the high branches. Their calls fade slowly as evening settles in. The air smells of warm stone, of green leaves, of faint smoke from a cooking fire nearby. He has swept this courtyard nearly every evening for most of his life now. He knows its stones the way he knows his own hands. Which ones sit loose? Which ones have worn smooth beneath the passing of many feet? Which corners gather leaves fastest when the wind comes from the east? The temple he sweeps is only one of many. The city spreads out for a great distance in every direction. Temple after temple, each with its own courtyards and causeways and reflecting pools. A person could walk from dawn to dusk and not reach the far edge of it. Most people never try. What holds it all together is water. Channels run everywhere, wide and shallow, carrying it from the river out to the fields and back again. There are reservoirs so large that standing at one end, a person cannot clearly make out the other. The water arrives when the rains come. It is kept. It is let out slowly across the dry months, so that rice grows in fields that would otherwise have nothing. It is not the kind of thing anyone builds in a lifetime. None of this happened quickly. It was built across generations by people who would never see the finished thing, adding to what the last generation had left them. The sweeper's own grandfather worked on a causeway that was not completed until the sweeper was a grown man. The carvings on the walls run on and on, telling stories in stone. Figure after figure worked in careful rows. Some of it he has looked at closely. Most of it he has simply swept beneath, evening after evening, the way a person stops seeing the walls of a room they live in. Bats move in the upper galleries. The light is failing. Somewhere out beyond the moat, a temple bell sounds once and goes quiet. The stone underfoot gives back the day's heat, slowly the way it always does. The roots of an old tree press against one low wall nearby, slow, patient. the way roots always press. He has watched them grow a little each year, wrapping further around the stone, neither hurrying nor stopping, simply continuing the way trees continue. He does not fight the roots. There is no use fighting something so patient. He only sweeps around them, the way he has always done, leaving them to their own slow work while he continues his. An old monk crosses the courtyard as the sweeper finishes his rounds. His robe is the same warm color as the last light in the sky. He pauses near the tree. He rests one hand against its trunk, the way a person rests a hand on something familiar. The sweeper asks him, quietly, whether it troubles him to watch the forest slowly claim the temple, wall by wall, stone by stone, a little more with each passing season. The old monk considers the tree for a long moment before answering. The forest is not taking the temple, he says. It is holding it. There is a difference, though it can be hard to see at first. He says nothing more. The sweeper looks at the roots again. He sees them now, perhaps, a little differently than a moment before. Not as something taking, as something holding. Patient and slow, the way the whole forest holds everything within its reach. The years that followed passed the way years pass in a place with no hurry in it, slowly, one warm season folding into the next. The temples stood through all of it. Their stone towers rose above the canopy. Their courtyards were swept faithfully for as long as there were hands willing to sweep them. The temple is busier by day than a stranger might expect. It is not only a place for ceremony. There are people who cook here, and people who keep the accounts, and people whose whole occupation is looking after the lamps. There are dancers who there are gardeners for the grounds inside the moat. All of it runs on rice, and the rice runs on the water, and the water runs on the channels and the reservoirs, and the endless small adjustments of people opening one gate and closing another. It is a machine of a kind, though nobody here would call it that. It is simply how the year works. The sweeper's own days are shaped by it too. He sweeps in the morning before the heat, and again in the evening when it breaks. Between those hours he does other things, carries, mends, helps where hands are needed. Nobody supervises him closely. The work is visible enough that anyone can see whether it was done. He has a wife and 2 grown sons in a village a short walk beyond the moat. The elder son works the fields. The younger one carves, badly for now, though he is improving. There is talk that he might be taken on properly by one of the masters. The sweeper does not push. These things settle themselves in their own time. In the evenings, walking home along the causeway with the light going orange behind the towers, he sometimes thinks about how many people it took to make this place. Not the kings, the others, the quarry workers, the carriers, the ones who fed, the ones who carried. None of their names are on any wall. He has never found that sad. Exactly. It is only how it is, and he is one of them, and the courtyard is clean tonight. The monks never entirely left either. That is worth saying. Through every century that followed, in greater numbers or smaller ones, there were robed figures moving through these galleries, sweeping their own stretches of stone, keeping their own small lamps. The forest grew around a living place, not an abandoned one. Incense burned somewhere inside it through all those green centuries. Bells were struck. The roots wrapped the towers, and beneath the roots, quietly, the old rhythms carried on at their own reduced and patient scale. So, when the travelers came through the undergrowth and stood amazed at what they took for a lost world, there were people nearby who could have told them, and eventually did, that nothing here was lost in the first place. Overgrown, yes, quieter than it had been, but held continuously the whole way through by roots and by hands, and by the simple refusal of some places to ever be fully let go of. Pilgrims walk the causeways at dawn now, as they always did. The great moat catches the first light and turns the color of hammered metal, and the towers rise out of the trees in silhouette, and every morning a fresh line of visitors stops at the same point on the western approach. Involuntarily, at the exact place where the whole of it first becomes visible. Monks pass among them, unhurried. Sweepers work the courtyards, branch brooms over old stone. The identical motion, the identical hour. Some of the sweepers are young men from the villages beyond the moat, doing the work their families have done, past all memory of beginning it. The courtyard is clean this morning. It will need sweeping again by evening. That is not a burden. That has never been a burden. That is simply the shape of a kept place and of the keeping. In time, for reasons the old records do not make clear, the sweeping stopped. The courtyards grew quiet in a new way. Leaves gathered where they had once been cleared each evening, and the forest, patient as ever, began moving closer. Roots spread further across the stone, wrapping themselves around walls and finding their way into cracks that had waited quietly for centuries to be filled. Trees grew tall between old courtyards, their canopies closed over towers that had once stood open beneath the sky. The temples did not fall. They did not crumble to nothing. They were held instead, the way the old monk once said they would be, wrapped slowly in root and leaf and shade, standing quietly within the forest's patient embrace for longer than anyone alive could measure. Travelers came upon them, centuries later, moving carefully through the deep green undergrowth, following paths that seemed to lead nowhere, until, all at once, stone rose ahead of them through the trees. Towers, carved as ever, upright, wrapped in roots grown thick as a person's arm, holding the old walls the way a hand holds something it has decided never to let go of. The trees had done remarkable things. Some had grown directly out of the tops of the towers, seeded there by a bird a long time ago, sending their roots down the outside of the stone in long pale ropes until they reached the ground. The stone held. The roots held. It is not a struggle between them, whatever it looks like. Neither one gave way, and after enough years it became difficult to say which was supporting which. In places, the roots had lifted whole blocks out of alignment, and in other places, they had held blocks in position that would otherwise have fallen. The forest had taken some things apart and kept others standing without any preference between the two, doing only what roots do. The carvings survived better than anyone would have guessed. Shaded from the sun, sheltered from the worst of the rain by the canopy overhead, the figures on the walls stayed sharp where open weather would have worn them smooth. The forest worn them smooth. The forest that seemed to be swallowing the temples had also been protecting them. And the temples had never been entirely empty. That was the other thing the traveler found. People had been living among them the whole time. In the villages that had always been there, walking past the towers on their way to the fields, using the old causeways because the old causeways went where people needed to go. The forest had held the stone. The people had held the memory. Between them, nothing had really been lost at all. It is not what ruins usually look like. The temples looked held, cared for, in their own strange, patient way, by roots that had spent centuries doing exactly what the old monk once described, not taking, keeping, gently, the way the whole forest keeps everything within its reach. The sweeper had long since been forgotten by name, the way most sweepers are. But something of his quiet, patient work seemed to live on in the forest itself. In the slow, careful way it chose, in the end, to hold what it had been given rather than let it go. Everything, it turns out, is held by something. The pillar is held by dust. The village is held by dunes. The harbor is held by the sea. The temple is held by roots. And tonight, wherever you are listening from, you are held too by whatever has carried you safely to this quiet, unhurried hour. You do not need to remember any of the 10 quiet worlds we wandered through tonight. There is a stillness in not remembering. There will be no questions in the morning. If one small room of the past stayed with you, one lamp, one stone, one thread of cotton between careful fingers, let that be enough. And if nothing stayed, that is fine too. The past does not mind being forgotten. It goes on quietly either way, the way it always has, long before you arrive tonight and long after you have drifted off to sleep. If you are still with us, thank you for staying this long into the dark. If you have already drifted off somewhere among the wells, or the dunes, or the quiet stone corridors, thank you for that too. Either way, you are exactly where you need to be. The world has been turning for a very long time, long before any of these 10 cities rose, and long after each of them was gently, patiently held. Tonight, it can turn without you for a while. You are allowed to rest. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Archive.